Hello, everyone, and welcome to Decentralized. We're being joined this week by Dan Metcalf. He's the CEO of XC and Blocknet, and he's joining us to talk about some two cool and decentralized projects. Thanks for joining us, Dan.
Hello, welcome. Thank you. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you, and unfortunately, our other guest was unable to join us today, but we're really looking forward to talking to you about the projects you're working on and sort of how you became involved in them. So the first question I would ask is sort of we gave sort of a brief introduction, but I'd love to hear your story about sort of who you are and what you're working on with XC and Blocknet.
Sure. So, I'm somebody that grew up as the technology was really being brought out, computers and then laptops, and now we have mobile. And with that, I've always been fascinated by kind of the cutting edge technology that comes with that. And with that, we have X currency. I got involved with X currency because I felt like there was a need for something different in the altcoin space. Not really to compete with Bitcoin, but to offer a solution that was really privacy specific and focused. And I didn't think there was anything in the marketplace at the time doing that. And it's been quite an adventure, ups and downs, highs and lows, challenges, as with anything that complex that's going to happen. But it's been a great project, and the community and the people that have been involved have been great and tremendous. So that in and of itself was really, really, an interesting concept that really secured for me the direction moving forward. And with that, it became apparent that within these digital communities, you have basically these mini communities of all these different altcoins. And if you could link those together and embrace and harness that, it would be revolutionary. So that's how I came up with the idea for Blocknet. And it wasn't something that, I just woke up and had the idea. It was something, each day I was like, oh, if we could do this or we could do that and have that in place, then we could leverage that moving forward. Because right now there's a lot of ideas and a lot of things going on, but nothing really is taking a solid foothold in the business marketplace. And that's ultimately where these things are going to thrive, is with consumers and businesses that are using these services day in and day out. And microservices and the Internet of Things is really where everything is going. So if you could envision the ability to launch and deploy microservices within any alt chain based on a fairly open platform, you could now create a whole new marketplace that could be embraced by people, that's completely decentralized and not controlled by any single authority. And I think ultimately that's kind of what we all want to embrace at the end of the day.
I definitely agree. And with that question asked, how did you get into decentralized tech? And what were your influences and what ideas or projects really influenced you? And because a lot of people came in through Bitcoin, but others really came in from other odd places where you see it and you go, wow, that was a weird, a weird way to start, a weird origin. But how about you? Where'd you come from there?
Well, it actually started with Napster, with their decentralized technology. But it became more with that. Once I got into Bitcoin, I really started to embrace and understand the true power. And it's not about the currency. It's it's about that shared database, that shared ledger system underneath it. And so that's kind of where it brought me a whole nother step. And then as the concept of applications or decentralized applications running on that type of technology, that's kind of where just my mind went, wow, that is really where, in 10 to 15 years, anything that's not running on this is going to be outdated.
It's a very interesting story, and I'm sure a lot of people came in through Napster and came in from different routes.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just add with that, because part of my background has been developing ad hoc networking systems, so it was really a combination of that experience with seeing what was happening with technologies like Napster to create these ad hoc systems, and then to combine the trustless power of what Bitcoin is doing, that's kind of really where it all came from.
It's interesting that you say that too, because on a side tangent with Napster, we've had guests on in the past and talked music thing, and I actually worked in music too, and I saw what was happening, and I tried to get a label at the time to say, hey, pay attention, here's what you can do to promote your record. Like, I think the best quote on it is when Neil Young said that piracy is the radio of today, because it is. It's like that's how you can get heard. You don't need to rely on gatekeepers, and labels help, but still there's other ways. And it opened up a lot of eyes, and it's weird that it took something as ubiquitous as music to open those eyes, and it really happened across industries. But when it happened to money, it's kind of like people were so not ready for that. People were not. The music industry wasn't ready for Napster, but the world was not ready for this to happen to money, and that's why the growth is slow, and I think it's solid. So I think overall, all the influences where people are coming from are really toward one goal, and it's really it's getting closer, and more money is being poured into it, which is great.
Absolutely. And if you think about like Uber, Uber is another example which came out of nowhere and just kind of shook the foundation of what's already there. And you can already see how that's crumbling the existing systems and legacy infrastructure that's in place for that. And Bitcoin is just another example of that technology that once, and it's already there. I mean, when I look at Bitcoin, I envision it's almost like this financial backbone network. And that's kind of why altcoins do have a place, because you don't want to mess with the core fundamentals of Bitcoin. You have a network that's what I call production ready, transferring all this value daily, and you can't really experiment with that. You can't do that in that type of environment. So that's kind of where altcoins have a huge potential, because they can try different things, and then once that technology is mature, then it can kind of scale up to work with Bitcoin.
And it's interesting you mentioned that about altcoins, because I've found value in altcoins myself, and I mean not economic, and there's tons of them that are just there to make a buck, but I think this idea that Bitcoin is the platform is inherently just not, it's not provable, right? There are so many people that are so bullish on everything being built on Bitcoin that it's like, it's not always the better technology that wins. It's all, every technology can be built on in different ways. Right. And this is not going to be the only blockchain technology. So it's interesting, because when I was at the O'Reilly Media Summit, a lot of the Pantera Capital people I was speaking with, and I want to name names, were very, very, very bearish on any altcoin period. They think that everything should be on the Bitcoin blockchain, side chains, whatever way you want to call that. So the fact that the project that I'm a part of is working on Ethereum was like blasphemy to them. And I'm like, no, Ethereum's trying to do things that Bitcoin isn't. It's not trying to be money. And Bitcoin's great for money, but let's try to optimize it for other things. And I think what you're doing is interesting, because all these blockchains are going to need to communicate. There's going to be a need for whatever's happening on the Bitcoin blockchain to transfer to every other blockchain that's out there. So it's a very cool project.
Yep, and for me too, the thing with Blocknet was to harness developers and the ability to create applications, because that's ultimately where we talk about what consumers are going to want. And if you look at what happened with, say, Android in the Play Store and Apple, it's these applications that these developers are creating that they're thinking up and they're doing. There wasn't a high cost to market this. They basically create the application, deploy it within the store, and then with little to no marketing, usually it's just viral, these applications become huge. So the same potential is here for having decentralized applications. I mean, ultimately, that is, having a system that can provide that to people, regardless of the underlying alt chain running it or the nodes, that's a win-win.
So you do have two very interesting projects you're working on here. You have Xcurrency and Blocknet, which I imagine sort of Blocknet kind of came out of Xcurrency, and sort of the work in that. But I'm very interested in sort of asking about the first question, since we're kind of on the point of altcoins. What do you see in Xcurrency that you're doing differently? What problem are you solving with that, and sort of how are you approaching kind of the altcoin space differently, do you think?
Well, sure. So, a lot has changed in a year, and I think when I first got involved in the altcoin space, there was a lot of just bogus altcoins that had no real function except for monetary value. And my idea was twofold. One was to bring forth an altcoin that was business driven for B2B services, and that's actually something that has really become a top focus lately for us. The second thing, though, is to provide the ability for privacy and private transactions, and we've actually come out with two different mixing type technologies, and both of them had limitations in how they work. So it's long term, that type of technology really isn't feasible for any altcoin or any blockchain, just the way that they work on there. So with that, we're really focused on coming up with B2B applications that harness the power of the blockchain underneath it. And one of those that we actually just launched was cryptotopup.com, and that site is where you can top up your cell phone either with Bitcoin or Xcurrency, and soon you'll be able to top up debit and ATM cards. So this is just an example of that type of B2B business, and that's a legitimate business that XC is engaged in with other vendors for those services. And I think that's also a first for many altcoins. I don't see many altcoins really being that business focused. Although today that has changed. You have an example like BitSwift, which they've actually launched their own backup system through their wallet, and there's another example of a B2B application that's running on top of a blockchain.
It is quite interesting. It does seem like businesses, in many respects, have been slower to embrace this technology just because of the higher input costs. But I do think there's definitely a huge market for that. Just kind of bringing this technology to them in usable ways. Another project you've recently partnered with was Bitnation, actually, and who Susanne, the founder, was unfortunately unable to join us. But we'd love to hear sort of about the nature of that partnership, how it came about, and what it's going to entail for X currency and for Blocknet and as well as Bitnation.
Well, sure. I mean, I can't really speak on Susan's behalf, and a lot of my input to that was from the technology side. But fundamentally, the idea is that we'll have this foundation that Blocknet is building with Horizon to support what Bitnation is trying to do. And when you have trustless self-governance, that's a huge step from where we are today. With just the entire how the whole world views things, to a future plan. So we're building the foundation to support that. And Bitnation is really going to be a bunch of different items, whether you have smart contracts, identity and trust management, all those different things. That if you think what a government does today, and you take each of those, they actually break down in like mini apps, right? And that's kind of what they're building to run on top of this platform that we're creating. So it's a combination of really concepts for applications with concept for technology working together towards a seamless goal.
That's very interesting. Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
It is interesting, and I think the thing about business an altcoin for business is true, and I think see that in a lot of projects where the altcoin itself isn't designed around the business people, business operations, different everything involved with that. But I think that applications built on top of it have increasingly been. And what do you think? What do you think is going to happen in the next 5 years? Where do you think this is going to go? Like, I love prognostication, especially from the hip prognostication with, just like the fun kind, where you go, oh, this is what I think is going to happen, and you're obviously could be wrong, because that's how everything like that works. I think they're very fun, so I like to hear what the brightest people in this space think about.
Well, I'm constantly thinking about how you can decentralize anything that's out there. How can it be decentralized, and how can you turn the power to the people hosting the nodes to get reward for payments for helping to do that? So that's that within itself there's challenges, because each one of those functions require specific logic design so you can prevent people from abusing it. But in theory, you can decentralize anything that uses a ledger or a database or anything like that can be decentralized. But there's also more than that. As you can see, what Ethereum is doing, they're taking it to a whole new level with the ability to run scripts across a decentralized platform. So it's any concept, anything that the government's doing, there's just so many things. The thing is, when you say 5 years, I think that window is too small. I think some of this technology is really looking beyond that. I think the next 5 years you're going to see Bitcoin mature to a certain point. You're going to see businesses really start and to embrace how they can do it. But there's also a lot of logistics, because right now, not even the laws like PCI compliance or HIPAA compliance or any of those, they wouldn't even allow you to decentralize any of their data. So those are still challenges that need to be overcome there. Then you have regulatory issues. So all of that's going to get washed out over the next 5 years. Meanwhile, you're going to have developers creating these decentralized applications. So just like you see how Android first launched and it was in the beginning to where it is today, that we're going to see, I think, a similar road for all of this technology as well.
And what do you think are sort of the obstacles you're facing with that? I mean, obviously, other than regulations, we've seen a lot of predictions of things in the decentralization space, Bitcoin space, happening a lot faster than they actually have in many respects.
Right.
Generally speaking, maybe you can't speak generally, but what obstacles do you face as a project and as a team, and how are you working to overcome those currently?
Well, I think the biggest challenge right now is twofold. One is that, part of what X currency is a payment solution, and it wants to be a mobile payment solution. But with that, you need to integrate into legacy networks like from MasterCard and Visa. And unfortunately, they're not really interested in talking to small-time players. I mean, so that's a reality. But there are other inroads to slowly move in that direction. And that's what I mean. Those are the things that are going to take time before you get the recognition, so you can move further up in that chain. And I think that those are the challenges. And just like with Bitcoin, years ago it was, we're going to decentralize the world. But the reality is you still have to decentralize the network and the money system. What you're doing today, you have to really make that solid, so you have the regulatory issues. And I think ultimately that's a huge challenge, depending on where that goes with New York and their bit license. And I think California is following suit. They want to have something too. So over regulation could hamper things, but we'll see. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to predict exactly what will happen on that front. But at the same time, as these applications mature, you'll just see them progress, just like any other technology did. Like the cloud, for example, when you first had the cloud, it was a lot different than what it looked like today, and it's become this usable, mature technology that anybody can use on their cell phone or their laptop or their tablet with ease.
Absolutely, and we actually are happy to finally have Suzanne back on, and wanted to introduce you to our audience and say hello. How are you?
Hi guys, I'm super excited to be on here. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to connect with all of you, especially Dan and Metcalf, who I've been chatting to for a very long time, and who have so much exciting stuff to share, you know. And I'm really, really excited about the Blocknet, Bitnation integration. And so yeah, it's great to be all on air with you guys.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to meet you as well, Suzanne. And why don't we go ahead and segue then? Sort of, we've been talking to Dan sort of about his own obstacles that Blocknet and XC have been facing to kind of user adoption. Let's kind of start off with sort of, can you tell our listeners about sort of who you are and what you're building with Bitnation?
All right. So basically, our idea is to build a decentralized governance model. Because we think the nation state is sort of going out of fashion, and we think there's a better way to do it, you know, rather than try a geographical monopoly on violence. We think we can offer the same services but a lot better, and a lot of it through using blockchain technology as a third-party component, a third-party arbitrator, essentially. So that includes ID and reputation. It also includes dispute resolution. It includes timestamping and tokenization, which can be used for a very wide variety of things, which I'm sure you're all aware of. And we have gotten a tremendous amount of support for it. You know, since we started to launch Bitnation, we got covered in everything from New York Times to Wired to Wall Street Journal to you name it, like all the mainstream media. Everybody's tremendously excited. We have hundreds of volunteers across the world working for the benefit of Bitnation. We have just signed up to 1,800 embassies. We have the alpha release getting released in about a week from now. And yeah, I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of things happening that is awesome, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back to something you said there when you were speaking on the government and the role. This is an internal dialogue we love having on the show because we all have different opinions, and that, of course, makes it interesting. Now, where did you stand when you were, you know, when you thought of like, okay, well, here's this idea of a government, and we are going to utilize technology to replace some of their roles. And with that being said, one of the issues that I always like to bring up is historically government's role in developing technology. Because most of the technologies we use every day, not all of course, but many, were created by government entities. And it's interesting because we're going onto a field where you know, government roles are slowly being, I think, reduced, slowly, very slowly. And it's interesting, and everyone comes in with a different perspective. And in this field, there's a lot of anti-government perspective. Whereas, just to end this with my personal opinion, mine is government served a role. It was the best we had. But with technology, can do it better. Why aren't we using that? That's my thing in a nutshell. Where do you stand?
I come from it from an anarchist perspective, philosophically, in the sense that I believe in a non-aggression principle. So I believe basically in voluntary agreements between consenting entities, whether they are individuals or groups or AI. And so I believe the current nation-state monopoly is wrong in that sense because it involves non-consenting entities. Because just because you are born in a random place on earth, you know, you have to consent to a government, a part of the government oligopoly you have not necessarily chosen and not necessarily want, you know, and I believe that is wrong. So I'm basically against the nation-state construct. That does not mean I'm against governance by any means. I think governance services by and of themselves are hugely valuable. Like, for instance, the ability to be able to protect your assets through incorporating a company or through getting married or through titling your land or whatever it may be, or proving your identity, etc., is extremely important in life, in our collective well-being. So I have nothing against governance. I have, from my anarchist perspective, something against coercion and the use of violence to impose those things.
It's a very interesting perspective and a good question to ask. We always ask ourselves. We've been talking to Dan a little bit of sort of about how Bitnation will be partnering with Blocknet to kind of decentralize these applications of governance to the blockchain. But one of the questions sort of I have, and certainly there's been sort of discussion of this in regard to Bitnation and other projects like it, is sort of balancing the user benefits of having something like maybe title or property protection with something like having a passport or a license or even a marriage title. Is there sort of a delineation for you between sort of what are valuable services that a government provides and what are actually services government provides which are inherently not improved by a blockchain? Is there anything sort of like, what would be the user benefit for me, I suppose, in sort of putting a passport on a blockchain in a system where we currently have passports provided by governments?
Well, I think that everything that can be automated are beneficial to be on the blockchain. I think there are some things that cannot be automated, and those includes some aspects of, for instance, insurgency or like private security, and some aspects of diplomacy. And those things will be services that are not part of the blockchain, and that's okay. Everything does not have to be on the blockchain. That we would like to automate everything we possibly can through the blockchain.
No, I'd like to add too as well, one of the key things is that you can't counterfeit something like this once it's on the blockchain. And that in of itself makes this technology extremely valuable. And it's not just for the people, it's even for governments too, that want to embrace the future. Because once you have it in there and you're able to prove that identity, now you have something that can't be counterfeited. And that in itself is extremely valuable.
One question I have for following up with that, I suppose, is certainly coming from that perspective then, is there any concern then about governments being able to use something like an unforgeable record, like an unforgeable passport on a blockchain, to actually sort of be more oppressive to individuals? That's certainly sort of one of the trade-offs we see in this security thing. But I'm wondering, sort of both of you, if you have any response to this.
Yes.
Is there any danger with governments actually using blockchains against people who want to be more free?
Yes, please let me answer to that. Yes, that is actually one of my greatest fears. I'm really actively trying to work against that. I think one of the things that will work against that is what Dan is doing with X currency. I'm a huge supporter of that. I'm also a supporter of Dash, and basically all the dark wallet movement. And I think it's very important that we actually, as a community, work very actively towards how the government can use it as a tool for oppression, because that is a very likely scenario. And I think we have many ways to counteract that, and we should actively do so.
And I think one of the things that's missing, and as a follow-up to this, in the blockchain community, is this idea of there's these finite uses for it. And in a conversation I had with Steve Albini, he kept mentioning that finance is one, and then I kind of looked at it and I was like, he's got a good point. Most of the applications I'm seeing built on here are for finance, and then I'm saying, what's necessary? Fire chat's necessary. Communication models are necessary. Manufacturing decentralization is necessary to create independent mesh networks based on hardware. And I think that that's like somewhere where investment really needs to be put into, and there needs to be more interest. Are there other areas, and not just in decentralized tech, but in technology in general, that maybe you think should get more money poured in, more VC capital, and large companies should be paying more attention to?
I'm not sure decentralization is actually always the right question. Decentralization is great because it provides obviously a central point of failure, but I'm not sure that's always the most accurate point to focus on. I mean, if you look at, like, for instance, services like timestamping, being able to use to record evidence on a decentralized database without any centralized third party, I think that may somehow be more important than even a currency application of it.
So one of the questions we were kind of interested in asking you, and particularly asking Dan, since you're sort of working with different areas of this sort of decentralized or blockchain-based these applications, is where you see the most challenges to adoption. Obviously, Dan was telling us a little bit about financial regulations, about problems with being adopted by legacy networks. And we certainly want to get his follow-up on that. But from you, Susanne, since your project's really working with individuals primarily, what problems do you see to people adopting sort of blockchain-based governance applications? What problems do you see with governments that your project may have to overcome? And then we'll go to Dan sort of for his follow-up on that with the Blocknet.
Wow, that was a lot of questions baked into one. I don't know where to start.
Let's say, what's the biggest challenge for Bitnation right now?
Well, that's an entirely different question. The biggest challenge for Bitnation right now is money, but that's an entirely different question from what you asked. But so yeah, so let's get back to your adoption challenge. Okay, so I try to look at everything from a scalability perspective. I am not interested in convincing you or me or the next door neighbor at whatever we're doing. I am motivated by convincing $1 billion market, which is currently in the developing world, because Systemd, which is a $10 trillion market, which includes people who are not incorporated and do not follow regulations and are unbanked, do you need these services urgently just to secure their basic assets, their corporate equity, their land titles, everything they own, etc., to assure prosperity for their next of their children and so forth. So that's the market I'm focused on. I'm not focused at all on short-term profits. It couldn't be more irrelevant to me, really. And so yeah, I think the biggest challenge in those markets are basically BTC adoption. I mean, the two are like very tightly tied together. Like the strategy Bitnation is taking is basically piggybacking on Bitnation right now, on Bitcoin right now. So we're targeting like a market where remittance is high, like Mexico and Philippines, and also markets where the economy crashed regularly, like Cyprus or Argentina, and other sort of very Bitcoin-friendly markets like Turkey, South Africa, etc., where the regulations are still slack enough, so people just won't care about alternative economy getting up to speed with the sort of mainstream economy, if you like. And where there is a lot of innovation going on because they won't get cracked down by NSA, if they just try to do something remotely original or interesting, and where they truly need it because they don't have access to normal banking services or normal governance services. So those are target audiences, and the way we're reaching them is through our ambassador network, which is spread throughout basically the world right now. And we just signed up a deal to have 1,800 embassies enabled. So we are getting there, I can't claim anything in terms of adoption since we haven't released the alpha version yet, but we will within a week though. So yeah. I mean, we're definitely going to hit all those target markets very hard, very quickly.
And Dan, would you say also that X currency is sort of targeting a similar group, Systemd, sort of this billion unbanked around the world, or is sort of a slightly different currency or consumer market for X currency?
No, I would think that there is no real bucket to contain really the consumer that we're going after. Ultimately, though, for me, I think the biggest challenge is usability. Ease of use of the application, ease of use of transferring the asset, whether it's the underlying coin or some type of smart contract. That's really for me where the app needs to be. It needs to be mobile. So you need to have the ability to interact with people in an ad hoc manner and exchange these assets, these tokens, whatever it is. And so for me, that's the challenge, is we need better software. We need better UIs and better interfaces so that it's 100% seamless for the end user. And, so that until we get there, it's hard to quantify kind of some of these other variables.
I agree with Dan 100%, and I think that's where we actually interact. Blocknet provides a lot of the backend we need, and we provide a lot of the UI, UX, and market adoption they need.
Well, it's a very interesting partnership, and I'm excited to see sort of where this goes for y'all. But before we wrap up here, we kind of wanted to ask, and Susanne kind of mentioned a few of these earlier on, but what other projects are you seeing out in the space that you recommend to our listeners, or that you're particularly excited about just as fans of this technology?
I'll go ahead, Susanne. I'll go last.
Oh, well, I was just about to ask you if you wanted to go ahead.
Well, yeah. So for me, one of the other projects that I've recently connected with is Ethereum, and I'm going to be taking over the organization of the Boston meetups for anybody who's interested in getting involved in writing, decentralized applications moving forward. So stay tuned for more information on that. But that's, those are the type of projects that I like to embrace. Projects that are really building and moving forward and allowing people to do their own applications like that.
Yeah, I would actually second that on that one. Like, I also think Ethereum is one of the most interesting projects in space. I know the Turing completeness do entail some security deficits, but I think it's, if we look at it as purely a smart contract platform rather than as a currency, it doesn't really matter. And I think also I'm very excited about the next technology, and of course my partner's Horizon, which is an improvement of the next paradigm code. And yeah, I mean, I think they're doing amazing work. Like, I used to be sort of like Bitcoin, like, I hated altcoins for a very long time, and then when I sort of emerged into like the whole altcoin space, I got very excited about the amount of pure innovation, that was in the space, and everything they were coming up with, and how like truly decentralized it was in terms of just activists doing different stuff and coming up with their own solutions. So now I am extraordinarily optimistic about it, and I think for sure the next on Horizon technology, and in combination with the Blocknet technology, is the very best of that space.
Yeah, absolutely. There seems to be quite a mind-boggling array of projects out there in the space, and we're excited to cover all of them. That's our goal. We really enjoyed talking to you all today. But before we close, I wanted to ask first Dan.
Yeah, I also want to give a shout out to like Dash.
I
also think Dash is cool.
That's a cool name, and this one has a cool purpose. So that's something I definitely am interested in using myself at some point. Completely legally, though. So anyone listening in, very legally. But before we close, first with Dan, then Susanne. How can listeners find out more about your work, get involved, find you online? So we'll start with Dan on that one.
So sure, right now the majority of discussions are happening on Slack. You can follow our Facebook and Twitter feeds for more information, but if you want to join in and get involved, there's a Slack for Xcurrency and Blocknet. And I'll make sure that the links for that, the invites, are available on the websites, so anybody can go there and get that information.
And Susanne?
www.bitnation.co. We'll very soon be updating our website, and it's going to be a lot fancier and more good-looking than it is right now. And when the alpha release of the platform is coming out, it's going to blow your mind. So stay tuned for that.
That's very exciting. Very cool. And we want to thank you both again. Our guests today have been Susanne Tempelhof and Dan Metcalfe.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
what Bitcoin is doing, that's kind of really where it all came from.
It's interesting that you say that too, because on a side tangent with Napster, we've had guests on in the past and talked music thing, and I actually worked in music too, and I saw what was happening, and I tried to get a label at the time to say, hey, pay attention, here's what you can do to promote your record. Like, I think the best quote on it is when Neil Young said that piracy is the radio of today, because it is. It's like that's how you can get heard. You don't need to rely on gatekeepers, and I mean, labels help, but still, there's other ways. And it opened up a lot of eyes, and it's weird that it took something, as ubiquitous as music to open those eyes, and it really happened across industries. But when it happened to money, it's kind of like people were so not ready for that. People were not. I mean, the music industry wasn't ready for Napster, but the world was not ready for this to happen to money, and that's why the growth is slow, and I think it's solid. So I think overall, all the influences where people are coming from are really toward one goal, and it's
with their decentralized technology. But it became more with that. Once I got into Bitcoin, I really started to embrace and understand the true power. And it's not about the currency. It's it's about that shared database, that shared ledger system underneath it. And so that's kind of where it brought me a whole nother step. And then, as the concept of applications or decentralized applications running on that type of technology, that's kind of where just my mind went, wow, that is really where, in 10 to 15 years, anything that's not running on this is going to be outdated.
It's a very interesting story, and I'm sure a lot of people came in through Napster and came in from different routes.
Well, yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
Let me just add with that, because part of my background has been developing ad hoc networking systems, so it was really a combination of that experience with seeing what was happening with technologies like Napster to create these ad hoc systems, and then to combine the trustless power of, and that's ultimately where these things are going to thrive, is with consumers and businesses that are using these services day in and day out. And microservices and the Internet of Things is really where everything is going. So if you could envision the ability to launch and deploy microservices within any alt chain based on a fairly open platform, you could now create a whole new marketplace that could be embraced by people, that's completely decentralized and not controlled by any single authority. And I think ultimately that's kind of what we all want to embrace at the end of the day.
I definitely agree. And with that question asked, how did you get into decentralized tech? And what were your influences, and what ideas or projects really influenced you? And because a lot of people came in through Bitcoin, but others really came in from other odd places where you see it and you go, wow, that was a weird, a weird way to start, a weird origin. But how about you? Where'd you come from there?
Well, it actually started with Napster.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Decentralized. We're being joined this week by Dan Metcalf. He's the CEO of XC and Blocknet, and he's joining us to talk about some two cool and decentralized projects. Thanks for joining us, Dan.
Hello, welcome. Thank you. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you, and unfortunately our other guest was unable to join us today, but we're really looking forward to talking to you about the projects you're working on and sort of how you became involved in them. So the first question I would ask is we gave sort of a brief introduction, but I'd love to hear your story about sort of who you are and what you're working on with XC and Blocknet.
Sure. So I'm somebody that grew up as technology was really being brought out, computers and then laptops, and now we have mobile. And with that, I've always been fascinated by kind of the cutting edge technology that comes with that. And with that, we have X currency. I got involved with X currency because I felt like there was a need for something different in the altcoin space. Not really to compete with Bitcoin, but to offer a solution that was really privacy specific and focused. And I didn't think there was anything in the marketplace at the time doing that. And it's been quite an adventure, ups and downs, highs and lows, challenges, as with anything that complex that's going to happen. But it's been a great project, and the community and the people that have been involved have been great and tremendous. So that in and of itself was really, really an interesting concept that really secured for me the direction moving forward. And with that, it became apparent that within these digital communities, you have basically these mini communities of all these different altcoins. And if you could link those together and embrace and harness that, it would be revolutionary. So that's how I came up with the idea for Blocknet. And it wasn't something that, I just woke up and had the idea. It was something, each day I was like, oh, if we could do this or we could do that, and have that in place, then we could leverage that moving forward. Because right now there's a lot of ideas and a lot of things going on, but nothing really is taking a solid foothold in the business marketplace.